kidnapped by corrupt marshals while screaming for help no one gave. Clara Penrose knew the dirt road behind her wagon might be the last trail she'd ever see. Her dress torn, arms bound, lips bruised from silence as the marshals mocked her in broad daylight, dragging her away from her family's land under the lie that she'd forged her late husband's deed. But truth meant nothing to men like Deputy Fallon, who wanted her gone so his cousin could buy up the valley cheap. And as the wagon creaked through the dry Texas wind, Clara locked eyes with the people watching. Shopkeepers, townsfolk, even the preacher, all too afraid or too blind to stop what they knew was wrong. And though she spat once at Fallon's boot when he called her a lying widow with too many opinions, all it got her was a rifle barrel to the side and a laugh from the one in the rear, Marshal Keene, who said women like her only learned when broken. But just as Fallon lifted his reins to whip the horses harder, there was a sudden whoop in the distance, high and sharp like a hawk cutting through thunder, and before Clara could blink, the marshals turned their heads as riders burst from the trees, 5 Comanche warriors dressed in war shirts and paint, the leader riding front with a curved lance high and a look in his eyes that froze even the dust midair, and the townspeople who had watched in silence now ran for cover, some screaming, some hiding, but the marshals grabbed rifles and shouted curses, not knowing. This was not a simple raid. This was judgment, because the lead warrior was known from the Pecos to the Platte, called Many Knives by his enemies, Hawk that Walks by his tribe, and Something Darker by the lawman who had seen what he did to those who touched women in chains. And while Fallon raised his rifle, Hawk that Walks leapt from his horse in a single blur of motion, landing on the wagon, knocking the weapon aside, pulling Clara free with one arm and throwing her behind him before the fight exploded like dry branches in flame. Keene fired and missed, the shot screaming past Hawk's ear. But before he could aim again, the Comanche struck his hand with the blunt side of his tomahawk, crushing it, then spun and disarmed Fallon, kicked him off the wagon, and stood over him with the sun behind him like a burning shadow. And Fallon, now begging, said it was a misunderstanding, said he had papers. But Clara, trembling, pulled those same fake papers from her dress where they had stuffed them, and threw them in the dust, saying, "My husband died protecting this land, and you used his grave as your stepping stone." And Hawk that Walks didn't speak, didn't need to. He just pointed to the horizon, and one by one, the marshals were tied and marched away barefoot, left to walk east under the eyes of their own people who now whispered and gawked. But Clara's knees gave out, and she would have fallen if not for Hawk catching her arm, gently now, asking in a low voice, "Did they hurt your soul or just your body?" And she didn't know how to answer that. Not then, but she rode with them. Yes, she rode with the Comanche, not as prisoner but as guest, and the days blurred, dust turning to rivers, fear to calm, as they crossed into lands most settlers never dared to name. And when they arrived at the village, she saw not savages but mothers, children, old ones sitting by fires with eyes like stone in sorrow. And though she expected to be judged, she was instead offered food, a blanket, even song. And in those weeks, her wounds healed slower than her heart, and Hawk that Walks told her stories of his sister who'd once been taken by white men in blue coats and never found again. And Clara cried then, for her too. And one night, around the fire, she said she wanted to learn their ways, not to become them, but to understand. And the medicine woman took her hands and said, "Then, you are already halfway there." And time passed like a slow creek, until word came that a new marshal rode west with 50 men and a price on Hawk's head for kidnapping Clara, twisting the tale into one of savagery and violence. And though Clara begged him to run, Hawk shook his head, saying, "If I run, they will say it's true. If I stand, they must face truth with their own eyes." And so they prepared, not for war, but for witness. And when the lawmen came, they found not a camp but a gathering, Comanches standing with weapons down. And Clara stepped forward in white buckskin robes, holding the deed, now signed by Judge Harlow himself, cleared of all lies, and she shouted, "You'll not take him, or me, for we are not the criminals here." But the new marshal, younger and colder, ordered her seized, and his men moved forward until the oldest woman in the tribe rose and placed a necklace around Clara's neck, saying, "She is wife of our chief." and you will not take her, and that lie, true only, in spirit, stopped the soldiers cold, because even they feared war with the tribe united. And as they backed away, the marshal stared into Hawk's eyes and said, "Next time, there won't be speeches." And Hawk replied, "Next time, there won't be mercy." And the two men stared, locked in a silence older than both their bloodlines, until the soldiers left and Clara exhaled, knees shaking, knowing the lie had saved them, for now. But later that night, she sat beside Hawk and whispered, "Was it a lie?" And he looked at the stars and said, "Only if you want it to be." And in the months that followed, she stayed not out of fear, but because the land began to speak to her the way her late husband's farm never had, because for the first time she felt like she was not surviving but living. And Hawk that walks, fierce and kind, showed her a way of strength that didn't need shouting or shackles. And when the rains came, they planted together. And when a child wandered into camp with a bruised face, Clara was the first to wrap him in arms and tell him he was safe. And years later, when settlers came again, this time led by Fallon's cousin with men and golden threats, Clara stood before the council fire and said, "I am no longer the widow Penrose. I am Clara of this tribe, and I will not let lies steal this peace." And though some doubted her, none could deny the fire in her eyes. And so when Fallon's cousin tried to burn the fields, he found himself surrounded not by warriors, but by settlers and Comanche together. And when he raised his pistol, Clara shot first, not to kill, but to warn, and the shot cracked the night like thunder. And the man fled, leaving only dust and shame. And in the seasons that passed, people came to see not a white woman lost, but a woman found. And Hawk, once feared, became known as one who bridged bloodlines with honor, and together they built something stronger than fences or flags, a truth that no marshal's paper could tear apart.